Tipranks presents TipTalks, the only podcast where you can listen to the insights, discover the trends, and power up your investment portfolio. Investors, welcome back to TipTalks, a podcast brought to you by Tipranks to dish out all your market insights and stock research, as well as pressing economic news. And that leads me to today's topic of conversation, in which we're going to get into what you need to know economically speaking, and even get into some of what's going on over at Microsoft, and conclude with how we're going to bring in the new year. Now, joining me today is Yulia Veiman, Tipranks' in-house analyst. Yulia, welcome, of course, back on with me to Tip Talks. The first question I have for you today is actually all about inflation. Of course, we just got a new inflationary reading. Can you talk to me a little bit about that new reading that just came out, as we came from, 3.6% inflation down to 3.3%?
Yeah, and it's not the first deceleration. We've been seeing it for a few months so far. Of course, it's in the center of everybody's attention since we had the spark in inflation and Fed started increasing rates to fight it. Now it seems that the Fed is winning the fight against inflation. The overall reading is the headline inflation is coming down. What's even more important is that core inflation, particularly goods inflation and also services inflation, is coming down. And one of the Federal Reserve's preferred measures is the services without housing. Core services without housing is also heading down. So all this together is a great sign that the inflation is decelerating and probably on the way to decelerate even more.
Sure. Now I'm going to go up for the average Joe investor out there and ask this question to follow up here. It's, of course, inflation coming down, great for our wallets, right? But what does it mean for the investor?
All right. So we have to look at the whole picture. It's not only inflation. When we look at, first of all, there is also producer price inflation that's
Sure.
that's also been heading down and pointing at, it's like a short-term leading indicator for the CPI, and it's also been pointing downwards. Beside that, you have to look at the job market, housing, retail, consumer sentiment. Almost all data points that we've been getting recently points to a softening, but nothing is crashing. Everything's slowly going down. Labor market is weakening. The wage pressures are lessening, and the housing's been slowing. So's been retail sales. But we don't see any figures that could point at a crisis, at a hard landing, which gives us hopes that we are really gonna get that soft landing we've been all praying for. With inflation coming down slowly but surely, but the economy, growing but slowly.
Sure.
Not overheating, but also not crashing. That's a very optimistic picture, although we have to continue watching the economic reports and all the other developments, because everything is influencing the outcomes, and we don't really know what's going to come next. So we have to watch the economic reports. And there are some data points that pointing in other directions, so it's worth watching closely what's happening.
Sure, I guess I can follow suit in Jerome Powell's words in saying that we have to continue to monitor the data, right, as it comes about. And of course, the Federal Reserve minutes that will be coming out for all of us to analyze and scrutinize. But this does beg a question, at least from the investor front, which is, all throughout the year, we've been watching, I want to say, even though we've had higher inflation, a lot of tech stocks, growth stocks, right, continuing on their upward trend. Where does this leave us now? Should value investors be doubling down on value? Should we still be playing it safe? Should we, double dip here into growth stocks and kind of plan for the new year heading into growth? What do you think?
Well, it's many questions together. So let's start with value. its time will come. I'm not sure it's now. Usually, statistically, value stocks do great when the economy is starting to recover.
Sure.
The economy hasn't slowed down yet, so it's a bit too early. According to expectation, this quarter we are going to see a serious slowdown in GDP growth from 4.9 annualized last quarter to somewhere below 1% this quarter. Bloomberg consensus of analysts says 0.7, so that's a serious slowdown. We'll see where everything's going from here. At this time it's difficult to foresee for more than 1 quarter. But I think that in the first quarter of the next year we're going to see continued slowdown, and then if nothing else appears to break that outlook in the second quarter, we're going to begin the recovery.
Sure, and that's where value plays would come in.
Exactly. So next quarter is probably the time start picking some value stocks, remembering that not everything that's cheap is value, right? You have to look at the quality, and I suggest that everybody uses Tipranks site for data insights and analysts' opinion on the stocks they like, so that they can pick some quality stocks for cheaper prices.
Sure. So now I have here on the screen in front of me, of course, Tipranks, the Microsoft stock analysis page pulled up. And I want to bring this up because, of course, Microsoft is back in the headlines for us all.
Right.
In a much different capacity than it was before, to some extent, right? OpenAI back in the headlines, Microsoft here. But Microsoft has been up at least year to date, almost 60% on the year. And now we just got a huge piece of news that came out just before the weekend. And as we enter into the new week here, of course, it's still lingering news for all of us to digest. But it comes down to Sam Altman, OpenAI, and Microsoft. Can you brief us a little bit about what's going on, like a snapshot of what's going on, but more importantly, what you think now? Because from my understanding, Microsoft is going to be taking on Sam Altman under their wing, and he'll have his own little department. Who knows what will come out of that? But what do you think is going to happen to Microsoft stock now that Sam Altman has actually joined the Microsoft team?
I think Microsoft is in a great position. In the best position in this story is Microsoft. It's a win-win-win from all sides for Microsoft. At first, they were as shocked as everybody else when Sam Altman was sacked, because they didn't even know. I personally was expected that the board would let Microsoft as their biggest investor know before they do this.
49%, right, of OpenAI. They own about something like that.
I'm not sure about percentage. I think their investment is 17 billion, something like that.
It's a lot.
Something huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a non-public company, is something huge, and of course, Microsoft is a great stakeholder, and it was very, very unusual. All these developments are very, very unusual. It's a huge shock for everyone, and the only loser from all this is OpenAI. The decision of the board to sack Altman without even explanation, without letting Microsoft know, without explaining to investors what really stood behind it, points at something fishy going in within the board. And I think Microsoft understood it straight away. And they tried to make the board reinstall Sam Altman, but I'm not sure he himself wants to come back after what happened. They had a huge spat with Yulia, forgot the name, the co-founder, the chief scientist. So I'm not sure he wants to come back at this point, especially that now we know that he's been discussing another venture, and raising funds for another AI venture. So it looks like Sam is going to work for Microsoft, and with his knowledge and with his brand name, it's so great for Microsoft, which is already a very, very strong and powerful and profitable company, but it's going to be bigger. It's going to be stronger, and it's going to be much more expensive in the future.
Sure. So now looking ahead and speaking about, Microsoft's future, and I want to say even big tech, right? Because we just mentioned a few moments ago that value really may be our best bet heading into the new year. I want to package this now all together for investors who are out there listening. And honestly, Microsoft, right, Google, Apple, all of these companies, let's be honest, they pack a lot of value in there, and you can certainly find, treasures worth of value in these big tech companies. But heading into the new year, whether it's Microsoft and taking maybe advantage now of, Microsoft and OpenAI and all of the saga in the news, or any of these other companies, when we look into the new year, 2024, close out 2023, how should we now begin to invest or prepare to invest? How do you think we should all open up the new year?
Very, very carefully. We should proceed very, very carefully, because the level of uncertainty, well, the markets are uncertain, but at the moment there are so many factors that can change the situation from 1 to 10 immediately, that we just have to proceed very, very carefully. Regarding value stocks, I didn't say it's the best bet. It could be one of the valuable additions to an investor's portfolio starting next quarter. Regarding growth, I don't think that we should change our strategy at the moment. As I said, growth is the king, but you should look at the quality and try to find quality companies that have a potential to grow their earnings. I'm not talking about growing in the price of stocks, because it can be market sentiment or some hysteria or some other vibes. I'm talking about growing earnings. You have to find quality companies that they have a potential for long-term growth in earnings, and try to find those at normal valuations. I mean, everything should be compared to their potential, their fair value. It's not easy at the moment, because many stocks, especially in technology sector, is way overvalued. But then many of those whose valuations look too high can grow much more in years to come.
Sure.
Like Microsoft.
Sure. So Microsoft is still in the running here for someone who's long term.
I'm not expecting a very fast growth in there, because it's a behemoth. It's huge.
Sure.
But it's a very, very valuable business. It can churn out earnings month after month, year after year, decade after decade. I think my grandkids will use Microsoft products. So yeah, I'm all for Microsoft.
So it's good to note, and what's also good to note is that we are, of course, going to be heading into the new year here, hopefully, right, towards that soft landing that we've all been hopeful for, expecting, wishing for, anything in between. Now, I want to just conclude today's podcast here and just throw a hot seat type of question towards you. Do you have any stocks, one or two stocks in mind, aside from the big tech plays, like maybe perhaps more of a value play, right, that we could look into and maybe add to our watch list?
Well, when we are all talking about, we are still talking, the hype is a bit, there is a bit less hype now, but we are all still talking about AI, right?
Sure.
And nobody in their right mind will buy NVIDIA now because it's so expensive. I mean, well, maybe somebody would, but it's too expensive. So I suggest that I don't want to name specific names, but I would suggest that investors look at the value chains around the AI. apart from NVIDIA, there are companies that supply NVIDIA with the tools to make semiconductors. NVIDIA designs the AI chips. Somebody produces the chips for them. Other companies supply the equipment that lets these guys make those AI chips. So look at these value chains and find quality companies along these value chains around AI. There are many, many opportunities out there.
Sure. I love that answer. It also brings us right to the Tipranks site where you can actually utilize some of our tools to find those very stock opportunities heading into the new year and, of course, closing out 2023. Investors, I want to share with you that it has been another honor and a privilege to be on here on this podcast with all of you. And we are looking forward to our next episode coming up next week where you can join us again for a whole nother batch worth of news. It's been another podcast worth of Tip Talks, and we look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Tipranks presents Tip Talks, the only podcast where you can listen to the insights, discover the trends, and power up your investment portfolio.